Today we'll be learning how to texture and provide materials for this particular 3D card text illusion. In the last video, we learned how to model this, set it up, and animate it step by step. So if you haven't watched that, definitely check that out. But if you're interested in the various materials used here, this video is for you. So let's actually figure out how each of the materials were created. In our last video, we left off in this particular situation. So before we start, we'll go ahead and change this from the graph editor to the shader editor, and we'll set all of our render defaults. We'll go to our render properties, switch on ambient occlusion, bloom, and screen space reflections, and we'll switch our viewport display from solid to rendered, and we'll change our background from this grayish color to a complete white. Then you can go ahead and just select each of the text objects and start giving them their materials. So for the text, I'm going to go ahead and zoom in and press Shift A and search for a wave texture. Then I'll press Shift A and search for a color ramp node, and I'll connect the color into the factor, and I'll change this from X to diagonal so that we get bands that go diagonally across the text just like this. Apart from that, I'll change this from linear to constant, and I'll drag this white value in, and I'll change it from a white to a yellowish color just like this. Then I'll go ahead and increase the metallic value all the way to 1, and I'll also reduce the roughness to something like 0.2. Then to get this to animate, I'm gonna go ahead and just select the phase offset and add in a driver by pressing hash frame by 20. So there's just this slight motion that also adds into this sort of an illusion effect, and I think that looks pretty cool. Your brain does get a bit confused as to how these textures are present on the actual text. Then I'll select this color ramp node and press Shift D to duplicate it, and just change this yellow from a yellow to a white by reducing the saturation all the way to 0, and then taking this color, plugging it into the factor, and passing this through a bump node. So press Shift A and search for a bump node, which will convert it to normal data, and then we can go ahead and plug the color into the height and the normal into the normal of the principled BSDF. That way we just get a little bit of fake thickness added into it. So when we add in lights, as you can see over here, there will be just a few highlights created that'll look a lot better. So once you're done with that, you can select this text outline object and go ahead and just delete the principled BSDF, press Shift A and search for a glass BSDF. Now you can plug this into the surface, and to make the glass look like glass, you have to make sure that in the render properties under screen space reflections, you have refraction enabled as well. Then in the material properties, for the settings, you have to change the blend mode to alpha blend, switch off show backface, and switch on screen space refraction. So that way you just have glass present at this edge, which looks pretty cool. You can always play around with the roughness of the glass as well as the color. So I think something like that looks pretty cool. After which I'm going to go ahead and deal with the material of the base card itself. So the base card should be completely metallic, and the base color has to be some types of lines, but I don't want the lines to be as uniform as this 3D text line. So I'm going to press Shift A and search for a wave texture itself, but I'm going to pass the wave texture through a noise texture. So that way, if you actually Control Shift click with the node wrangler enabled, you see how the lines are no longer uniform. There is repetition, so to remove the repetition, we reduce the scale from 5 to something like 0.4, and now you can barely tell there's any repetition. Similarly, for the noise scale, we'll reduce that down as well to maybe 1.5, after which we'll change this as well from X to diagonal. Once you're happy with that, pass this through a color ramp. So press Shift A and search for a color ramp node, plug that in right here, change this from linear to constant, and choose the various colors that you want. So I'm going to keep it at a white color with maybe some bluish streaks and some yellowish streaks. Let's change this to a bluish color, and we'll press Control click to add in a new stop, and we'll change this to a yellowish color. Then we have to make sure that we play around with the positioning of these stops just to make the streaks look a bit better. So something like that seems fine. Just like last time, by playing around with the phase offset, you can get this sort of a moving effect. So this time I'm going to add in a negative driver by pressing hash frame divided by -40. So that way we get this sort of an effect. You might not want the driver, but we'll take care of that later on. For now, I'm just going to reduce the roughness as well down to 0.2, and then start texturing everything else. For the gears, I'm going to add in a new material. Just make it a very dark metallic color, because that's what gears mostly are, and that's all there is to that part. For the actual outline of the base card, you can select it and give it a metallic black color, and I think I'm going to increase the thickness a bit by going to the modifiers and just increasing the thickness, and that looks pretty cool. Next up, for the cards, I want the cards text to be written in black, so I'll delete the principled BSDF, press Shift A and search for a diffuse BSDF, and I'll just plug that into the surface and change the color all the way to black. However, for this actual text box that I have over here, I don't want all of it to be a single color. I want some of it to have a different color. Essentially, this border should be a different color as compared to the background. So what I'll do is I'll select this background background, go to the material tab over here, and then first in object mode, add in a new material and label this as text box. Then press this plus button to create a new material slot, press new and call it text box interior. And now press tab to go into edit mode, select text box interior and click assign. Now with text box selected, we can go ahead and give this as well a glass material. So just tap X to delete it, Shift A and search for glass BSDF, plug that into the surface, and under the settings, blend mode should be alpha blend, shadow mode should be none, and show backface should be switched off, screen space refraction has to be switched on. Then for the actual background, we can select it by going to the material properties and choosing text box interior. This one, I'm going to make a rough bluish color. So I'm going to search for a noise texture as well as a color ramp node by pressing Shift A and searching for a color ramp. Then I'll plug this color into the factor, and this white color over here I'll change to this sort of a bluish color, and I'll plug this into the base color. Now if I look at it, the noise texture is actually stretched on the x-axis, which you can see if you just bring in this black. So to fix that, you can just press Ctrl T with the node wrangler enabled to get the texture coordinate and mapping nodes and switch this from generated to object. So once you drag this in, you should have something that looks like this. I'm going to take this black, make it a complete white, bring this blue in, and then just increase the detail and increase the roughness to maybe 0.7, and just dragging down the color of the blue gives it this sort of an effect, which I think looks pretty cool. So that's that for the cards section. Maybe these lines are not looking good when they're animated, so I'll just delete the driver, change the phase offset to something that I think suits, and that should be good enough. So now coming to the back side, obviously we don't want the back side to have the same type of streaks that we have on the front. So let's go ahead and press tab to go into edit mode. Just select this back face, press this plus button to add in a new material slot, press this to create a new material, call this base card back, and then hit this assign button. Now you can press tab again to go into object mode and start messing around with the actual material. So on this side, I want it to be much more sober. So I'm going to just make it completely metallic at a complete white and reduce the roughness down to 0.3. For the actual rocket material, I'm just going to change the base colors to the blue that we had for both the rocket as well as the border. And for the actual text, I'm going to go ahead and delete the principled BSDF, press Shift A and search for a diffuse BSDF, and use the same yellow that we were using on the other side. Now, if you want some texture here, you could choose what suits your objective the best, but I'm going to search for a gradient texture so that I get circles, because on the front side, we were using lines. So on the back side, I want to use circles. So I'll press Shift T to add in a texture coordinate and mapping nodes with the node wrangler enabled, and switch from generated to object and change this from linear to spherical. Now if I Control Shift click this, you can see what the gradient looks like. However, if I press Shift A and search for a noise texture, plug it in here, we get these nice concentric rings that we can change by playing around with the scale. Similarly, just as we did in the previous lines, we'll press Shift A and search for a color ramp, plug it in after the noise texture, change this from linear to constant, and then play around with the actual colors. This time I'm going to go for just yellow and black, or yellow and white, or maybe yellow, black and white. So I'll click here to add in a new stop by pressing Control click and then just making this white, and I'll just drag it in till there's some black as well. So that looks good, but I don't want the circles to be present here because that's covering up my logo. I want these circles to be much broader outside. So for the mapping node that goes into my gradient texture, I'm going to reduce the scale, and that'll just increase the size of these circles. So something like that might look good. Now the Dayan Studios is getting washed out with the yellow over here. I'm just going to select each of these texts, press Shift D to add in another text at the exact same place, but this time for the object data properties, I'm going to change the fill mode to none. Under the bevel, I'm just going to increase the depth by a little bit. For the materials, I'm just going to duplicate it and make it a complete black color. That way we get a nice outline, and it can be seen even with the yellow background present. I'll do the same thing for the Dayan. Select it, Shift D to duplicate it, fill mode becomes none, bevel depth increases. Material, you can go ahead and just choose the other one that we just made. Now to remove everything behind this logo, I'll press Shift A and search for a mesh circle, or X90 to rotate it on the X-axis by 90 degrees. Then I'll press tab to go into edit mode and press F to add in a face. Now, of course, you couldn't see anything that I just did because it was all hidden behind this particular card. But essentially, if you follow the same steps, you should have a circle with a face created. Now I'll press GY and just bring it till it's in front of the card, but not in front of the logo. So something like this. And I'll press S and just scale it down till about there. And I'll press GY and just bring it back a bit. Shift select the base card and press Ctrl P, set parent to object. For this one's material, I'll add in a new material and I'll make it completely metallic, reduce the roughness down to something like 0.1, and base color keep it as completely white. Next, let's just give some materials to these Bezier circles. So I'm going to make these fairly simple. Remove the principled BSDF, press Shift A and search for an emission node or a diffuse BSDF, plug it into the surface and change the color to maybe the blues that we had. So that's actually all there is to create this sort of a card, but it obviously won't look good without a background. So to add in a background, press Shift A, search for a mesh plane, RX90 to rotate it on the x-axis by 90 degrees, and then just scale it up till it's completely covering the camera view as well. And now we obviously don't want it to seem like the actual camera is rotating. It should seem like the card is the one that was rotating. So for that, we need to make sure that this background also moves along with the camera. So let's select it, move it back on the y-axis so that it doesn't cut the logo off as it was doing just before this. Then once it's back there, scale it up again so that it's completely covering the camera view, and then add in an object constraint and choose copy rotation and choose the camera as the target. So now if you actually look at it, as the camera rotates, the background will also rotate, and when you add in a texture to the background, you won't be able to tell that the camera is moving. Instead, it'll look like the card is the one that's doing the motion. So let's select the background, add in a new material, call it background, and for this I'll press Shift and search for a Voronoi texture, add the color into the base color, switch over to material preview again or rendered view, and then press Shift and search for a color ramp node, plug it in right here, and this time add in a few stops by pressing this plus button. And I'll keep the first one at black. Maybe the second one I'll change to the brightest blue that we had. The third one we can change to maybe a white, and the fourth one to the brightest yellow that we had. Then just bring these stops in till you get a nice distribution of colors that you like. You can increase the scale as well, and then go ahead and make it completely metallic and completely rough as well. So that way you won't see any of the specular reflections or anything. And to make sure that you don't see anything outside the camera view, you can select the camera, go to the camera properties, go to viewport display, and increase passport out all the way to 1. So now you can still see that there is some motion in the background. So to remove that completely, just select the background and then shift select the camera and then press Ctrl P, set parent to object. So that way it's going to be parented to the camera and it definitely will not show any motion when you actually view the animation. To make it brighter, you can actually plug the color directly into the emission, remove it from the base color, change the base color to black, and again just play around with these stops till you're happy with what you get. Now to actually make this pop a lot more, we need to add in the real lighting, because till now we haven't actually added in any lights. So let's press Shift A and search for an area light. For the area light, I'll press RX90, GY, move it to the side, and then press SX to make it shorter, and then press RY to just rotate it. Then I'll switch the pivot from median point to 3D cursor and just rotate it about the Z to angle it to something like that, after which I'll press 0 to go into my camera view to see what we have, and I'll increase this power from 10 to 100. Then I'll press SYY and just scale it up, and that's my first area lamp. Now I'll press Shift D to duplicate it, move it on the x-axis, and then rotate it about its individual origin and about the z-axis to point it inward, just like that. Rotate it about the local z to move it like that. And now we just have two simple lights which add in these nice specular reflections and things like that, which look pretty cool when it turns. But of course, we need there to be lighting otherwise as well, for which we're going to press Shift A and search for another area lamp. This time we're going to press GY, move it back, GZ, move it up, then just rotate it on the x-axis till it's pointing towards our base card, scale it up a bit, increase the power to 100, press 0 to go into your camera view, and just rotate it till it's actually lighting everything up. And to not make everything look washed out, you can go to your render properties, under color management, change the look from none to high contrast. Now the roughness on this with that larger area lamp is causing a sharp line there. I don't want the sharp line, so we can either increase the roughness by a bit, and I think that looks pretty cool, but it becomes harder to see the actual logo. Let's select the logo again, remove this, add in a new material, and I'm going to make this emissive. So delete the principled BSDF, press Shift A. I'm going to search for a glossy BSDF, plug that into the surface, make it that bluish color, and increase the roughness or decrease it. If you want, you can switch from object to world and then press Shift A and search for an environment texture. Then you can open up any HDRI from Polyhaven or any website that you prefer and just plug that into the color. That way you might get better reflections as well. However, I'm not going to be using an HDRI for this particular video. Now I'm not seeing any reflections on this card, so if you actually look at the card material, we haven't connected the color into the base color of the principled BSDF, which is why it was completely flat till now. Once you actually connect it to the principled BSDF, it'll also be reflective, and based on how the reflections are looking, you might have to play around with the roughness values and things like that to get what you want. I think for my bloom, I'm going to reduce the intensity down to 0.01, and I'm going to clamp it down at 4 as well, just so that the bloom stops overpowering and we get better animations. So once you're happy with everything, you can go ahead and press render animation. I hope this video helped you and you were able to successfully complete your own 3D card with your own logos and names. Of course, there are variations of this that can be created and you can take it to a whole other level. This was just the method that I used to texture these two animations. If you create this, I'd love to see them. So definitely let me know that you created it and share the videos with me so that I can take a look at them. I post videos every single day, so I'm sure there's something or the other present on my channel for you to find. Until the next video comes out tomorrow, thank you so much for watching. Keep creating and stay creative.